Right, let's get started. Can everyone at the back hear me okay? Because I know there's like a larger room than we're used to. Okay, wonderful. So let's dive straight in. My project is on modeling large-scale cyber attacks and advanced AI systems using advanced persistent threats. The main theory of change here is try to get a clearer picture of how cyber attacks and advanced AI systems may unfold. Why? Because in lots of threat models for AI existential risk, there are usually instances of AI systems engaging in this sort of behavior. An example, an AI system hacking into a BSL-4 lab in order to siphon away data about the state-of-the-art pathogen synthesis. But a lot of these discussions are often quite abstract, and by glossing over all of these details, we risk kind of creating these narratives which deviate from reality. So what I want to do here is really provide frameworks and a vocabulary for thinking about this more clearly, and also some tactics for kind of preventing and preparing for these attacks if they are to unfold. More personally, I was also interested in trying to form an inside view and get data on how useful I find this more high-level strategic clarity sort of work. And just a bit of clarification, Sam Clark kind of buckets the type of work in AI governance into five different buckets. On the left-hand side, we've got strategic clarity research. On the right-hand side, we've got more applied research, policy implementation. This work falls on that left-hand side, so strategic clarity and tactics. Okay, so the main method of this is to ask how useful advanced persistent threats are as a model for cyber attacks and advanced AI. Now, advanced persistent threats, I'll talk more about them in the next slide, but for now, all you need to know is that they are state-funded cyber attackers. And so then the first part of this talk is really going to be focused on, well, how useful are these as a model? Is there a comparison here to be made at all? So I'll give you a quick overview of the key features of an APT attack. I'll then try to give you a framework for thinking about these, and then I'll apply this framework to the different environments that an AI system may operate in order to try to ground this. And in the second half, I'll then premise on these being a useful model, and then ask, well, then how can we prepare and prevent these? So I'll scope that question a bit more first, and I'll give you two very high-level methods that we could use to prevent and prepare. Long-term memory monitoring and monitoring for the acquisition of computer infrastructure. Okay, some key features of an APT attack. APTs, as I said, are state-funded organizations. They consist of tens to hundreds of highly skilled hackers working for anywhere months to years. You guys may have heard of SolarWinds, which was executed around October 2019. It started where there was an initial breach of a software company called SolarWinds. And this bug was only discovered in December 2020, so that gives you a picture of how long these attackers can be in these networks for. The victims of APT attacks are usually of high political and economic military value, and that was the main kind of motivation here for making this comparison. And they have a lot of money. So they utilize extensive computer networks. That graph on the right-hand side is the computer network, the attack infrastructure used by a group called APT38. So they have servers all over the world in order to conduct these attacks. Okay, so in order to then make this comparison to advanced AI systems, we need to ask, how can we take an APT and map it to an advanced AI system? And the rough method I'm using here is first I'm trying to guess, well, how many hours of skilled human labor does it take to execute one of these APT attacks? I've calculated a very order of magnitude estimate for SolarWinds, and I roughly arrive at the figure of tens of thousands of hours it takes for these attacks to be carried out. I'm going to call this the attack workload. And then in order to ask what sort of AI systems can do these APT attacks, my question is basically, what sort of AI system can then execute this attack workload in reasonable timeframes? And by reasonable here, I mean 1 to 100 days. I'll discuss that more in the next slide. Some assumptions we're making, some implicit assumptions, which we can definitely talk about more in the questions, is that I'm assuming we're taking skill profiles roughly similar to humans. So these AI systems are very advanced. They are roughly nearing human level. I'm glossing over some little things like whether the skilled hacker versus regular hacker distinction, but again, we can come to that later in the question. And then in order to keep going with this question of how can we calculate the amount of time it takes an AI system to execute this attack workload, I'm going to parameterize AI systems on 3 dimensions. The number of independent agents running here. V, how much quicker these agents think and act than humans. These are hopefully quite intuitive, but I'll go through an example in the next slide. And the third parameter is may need a bit more explanation. F, which I call the fraction of actions serving this dangerous goal. The idea here is that if you had your 5 GPT-6s in order to manage your emails and manage your schedule, then then if they instantly started writing malware and like performing reconnaissance on a BSL-4 lab, you'd probably expect that something was up. So what's probably going to happen in real life is that these AI systems will engage in a certain fraction of actions such that they are pursuing their real intended goal, and the rest of these actions will be, well, what you as the operator intend them to do. That will allow them to go about with their activity relatively unnoticed. F is really meant to capture like the fraction of oversight that we're applying onto these systems. That was the main intuition there. Okay, and then, so for example, if we have an attack workload of tens of thousands of hours, in order to get the time, or I'm calling it the attack calendar time, it takes for these systems to execute that attack workload, then we just divide the attack workload by n times v times f. And for those numbers on that first bullet point, if you take 100 systems operating 5 times as quick as humans, and like an oversight fraction of 0.01, so that means for every one action which the system is doing in pursuit of its cyber attack, it's maybe doing 99 actions in pursuit of the goal that the operator intends. Then we get an attack time of 80 days. And what this allows me to do is to say what kind of systems I'm not considering at all. So I'm not considering, I'm calling strong superintelligence a type of AI system which can execute this attack workload in something like minutes or hours. So I'm ignoring those systems because I feel like it's kind of hard to do anything about those systems. And of course, there's a lot that can be added to this framework. It's like a first order approximation to get us up and rolling on this question of how we can make this comparison. We can ask how different tools will affect how we can move through this attack workload. And I myself am quite unsure on these values of F. I'm like the fraction of oversight. I'm unsure what could inform these for now. But again, it's just meant to capture, it's a parameter to capture this idea of like, how much oversight are we applying to these systems? Okay, now let's ask how we can map APTs to advanced AI, the environments which these advanced AI systems operate in. So the intuition here is hopefully quite obvious. The different types of environments that these systems operate in probably dictate how likely they are to be able to execute this attack. So for example, during the system training, there may be certain guardrails which the trainers apply to their systems, which say something like, we are only allowed to run 10 systems whilst training, or like 10 instances or agents here while we're training. And oversight is very, very high. So we're really looking to provide like very high fidelity to the model's actions during training. And if you plug these numbers in, you get something with an attack workload of 10,000 hours, you get something like 23 years to carry out a cyber attack, which is probably not going to happen. Do the same thing for external evaluations. Perhaps we reduce some guardrails here and we say, okay, now you can run 100 agents. But there's still relatively high degrees of oversight. You get an attack calendar time of 2.5 years. And then the idea here is that as we move these systems into deployment and various guardrails are lowered and the degree of oversight decreases too, we start to get attack calendar times in reasonable timeframes. And that general intuition is just conveyed on that graph on the right. Okay. So that's the rough mapping I'm taking from APT attackers to AI systems. Let's now ask the next question. Let's assume that these are somewhat sensible models. Let's assume there's a somewhat sensible comparison to be made here. And let's ask, well, how can we prepare and prevent these attacks? So as a framing question, consider the following scenario. You're on the network administration team of a Tesla car manufacturing in 2035. Operating comms, which is an AI system that is responsible for managing supply chain logistics, factory communications, internal security, things like that. You find out that over the past 40 days, comms has been engaging in a cyber espionage attack on a BSL-4 lab, like siphoning away data about state-of-the-art pathogens. And my claim is that when you're doing the post-mortem of this attack, you'll probably be asking two questions. How on earth did the system acquire these capabilities? We're assuming, of course, that the system wasn't really fine-tuned for cyber offense. And irrespective of capabilities, well, where was the oversight during these 40 days? During these 40 days, your system was managed to perform reconnaissance, develop malware, and insert that malware onto this target network. And it also managed to spend maybe weeks searching around this target network for useful data. So where was the oversight on the network administrators on their behalf? Let's scope that question a bit more. I'm going to focus on question 2 only. Basically, it's more tractable. I can discuss why I think that in the questions. And I'm also going to decompose the question of oversight into two parts. Oversight of pre-compromise activities before the system inserts malware onto the network, and post-compromise. One assumption we're going to have to make here, and that is we're going to have to initially assume that at least the model does not exfiltrate. And I think this is the key limiting assumption of this analysis. I'm, again, happy to talk more about that in the questions, but the reason here is basically, well, if your model exfiltrates to a server in the middle of a desert somewhere, there's not really much oversight you can do. So we assume all of that. Then we can move on to, well, let's decompose pre-compromise activity into 3 overlapping stages. The distinction there isn't that clear. But basically reconnaissance, in which the system or the adversary performs some kind of research on the target that it's attacking. Resource acquisition, in which it gains the technical infrastructure and the human resources to execute this attack. And then the actual stage in which it inserts the malware onto the target network. Okay, so first, like 2 very high-level recommendations for what kind of oversight can be used to prevent this. My claim here is that reconnaissance and resource acquisition for APT attacks has workloads on the scale of tens of thousands of hours again. These are very hefty attacks. It can take years for APTs in order to prepare their attacks before they actually execute them. And then it seems like, therefore, the system will need some sort of long-term memory required to execute this. The analogy that I'm thinking here is that imagine you're doing a 6-month dissertation. And the results that you gain in month 1 and month 2, well, they need to be kept somewhere in order for you to come back maybe months 3, 4, 5, and kind of synthesize these and move forward. So what sort of oversight could human operators apply there? This seems like a somewhat promising juncture to get in there and identify the model, perhaps storing away IP addresses which it plans to use in 10 days. Some sub-questions here are like, okay, what types of memory storage could be used here? Some types of memory storage seem more searchable by human or AI overseers than others. And logistics, who's responsible for this, how often, how feasible is it to use narrow AI systems here? Huh? Oh, okay, got it, thank you. And very, very quickly, another kind of potential method for oversight here is how does the system acquire like hundreds of thousands of servers for the computer infrastructure it needs for this attack. I'm going to brush over this one just because I'm out of time, but here's some further questions that can be pursued here.
Well, that's perfect for further questions because now it's a Q&A session for 5 minutes.
Let's do it.
Well,